Hi, and welcome to AXSchat. We're delighted to welcome Lou Orslene to us today. Lou is responsible for one of the premier programs delivering accommodations to people in work in the United States.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lou. Neil is joining us from the train. Yes, and I think that
so I'm going to say hi and goodbye because of the signal's not great, but I just wanted to say hello because it's really important that we've got you on today.
Thank you very much, Neil. Safe travels.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Neil. Okay, well, so Lou, welcome so much to the program. We're really excited to have you here today talking about Job Accommodations Network. And I know you're joining us from the lovely Morgantown, West Virginia, one of the most beautiful states in the United States. And so we're really glad to have you. And we're glad that Neil could pop in.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful now. All of the daffodils are up and the heather's blooming, and it is a glorious time of the year. Spring's one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah. I know spring is so beautiful in Virginia, too. We all can't breathe and we're coughing and, you know, having allergy attacks, but wow, it's pretty. Wow, it's very pretty. So, so you've got Antonio and myself today interviewing you, but I do want to say that one reason why I invited you to be on the program is because the Job Accommodation Network, Ask Jan, is their website, AXSchat.org. This is one program that we are so proud of in the United States, and it is funded by our Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy, and it just has been such a success. And we're really proud of the work that you are doing over there, Lou. So welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys and talk a little bit about Jan. We have had great leadership in the past, and it's just a pretty comprehensive network of employers, service providers, and individuals which continuously feed us information and just make us that much better every year. So thanks very much for those comments about Jan.
Yes. So I'm going to start, and then I'll turn it over to Antonio to ask the next question. But tell us who you are and tell us what the Job Accommodation or Ask Jan, tell us about the program.
Sure. So I'm Lou Orslene. I'm one of the directors of the Job Accommodation Network. I share that responsibility with Ann Hirsch. She's the other co-director here at the Job Accommodation Network. So what Jan does is we provide technical assistance on workplace accommodations, disability legislation, very specifically Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also provide information about assistive technologies that can be used for accommodations. So we have a cognitive team, a psychiatric team, motor team, sensory team. All of our team members are, in terms of their education, are master's level or better. Many of our folks have PhDs, have worked in private industry and the public sector, and then come to us. So they bring a lot of corporate and public sector experience as well. We do about 47,000 consultations per year. That's grown considerably since the Amendments Act of the ADA in 2008, and in particular Section 503. I'm here of the refresh of Section 503 during the refresh of the Rehab Act of 73. So our consultations, we're very heartened up really about the future because we really see that employers are understanding the business case for hiring and advancing people with disabilities, and so very, very promising future. Yeah, so that's, we have a website, as Deborah had said, AskJan.org. We provide free webcasts monthly, quarterly. We team or partner with one of our customers, usually a corporate customer who has a best practice to share. And we do a considerable amount of training, about 100 trainings throughout the country per year as well. We hit about 13 of the major national conferences per year and do training and typically roll out new training videos, new online products, new apps that we've developed at those conferences. So I think that gives you a sort of amalgam of what we do and who we are.
And I know that all the work you do is confidential too, because I know that one thing that I had heard from corporations very early on was, well, we'd love to work with, an organization like AXSchat to ask them, how do we accommodate this individual, or the individual with a disability needed help. And of course, we all know we can go to your website, and your website has so much great information. It has a lot of data that tells you how to accommodate a person with disability from A to Z, or with a specific disability. It's wonderful data, but still, because the government was funding AskJan, I know some of my customers were like afraid that if they came and revealed that they didn't know how to accommodate the person, they'd get in trouble. And I was like, no, it's totally confidential. Right. So I want you to talk about that, and then also talk a little bit about your global, and then I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass the mic to Antonio to ask you some questions after you answer these.
Sure, and thanks for bringing that up, Deborah, because absolutely. And what's interesting is that the confidentiality of our services isn't just important to our corporate customers, although that's when it comes up in the conversation the most, but also to individuals with disabilities. If particularly somebody who is newly disclosed or has a very a disability or impairment or chronic health condition that's not well known or that's stigmatized, they too want to ensure that any conversations that they have with our consultants or any exchanges that they have through chat or Skype or email or at our virtual office in Second Life, that all of that is confidential. And indeed it is, so we can assure everyone. We've never been asked for any identifiers for any of our customers by the government. And as Deborah said, we are a service, and I should have noted this earlier, but we're a service of the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and they are an agency at the U.S. Department of Labor. And do you want me to just talk a little bit about the international work that we have conducted?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, so over the years, since we really have created a really effective model here at the Job Accommodation Network, a number of other countries have contacted us and just asked us for technical assistance on setting up a JAN-like entity in their country. Also, some countries are just interested in replicating different parts of the model. So we've facilitated that over the years. And we've done that. We have done that in South Korea, and I served on a blue ribbon panel in India when India was looking specifically at retention that they were having some of their large global companies there in Bangalore. And we got together and we did presentations and talked about the JAN and the USBLN and some of the other services there in the US, and then how can they use their precious dollars to create such an entity. If we talk about Australia, Australia replicated a service very similar to ours, and it's called Job Access. And as a matter of fact, I still serve on an advisory panel there for Job Access, and they've pretty much replicated the entire model. In Japan, they were interested in our searchable online accommodation resource. That's one of the resources, the online resources that we have, one of the tools that one can just go in and after a series of questions, then just be presented with accommodation suggestions and perhaps assistive technologies, links to assistive technology that can work in their industry, in their specific job. In Taiwan, the Taiwanese government just asked permission to translate and replicate our publications. And so we've worked with, a number of countries through all over the globe. Sometimes it's just presenting, like in Mexico City. They just wanted us to present on accommodations in general, but then also more specifically on how JAN functions. And then for a while, we ran JAN Canada, which was a service very similar to JAN, and we ran it for the Canadian government here in the US. So, we have done a considerable amount of outreach, and a lot of times even without that outreach, we just have countries contacting us, like Peru. We're working with Peru right now, and they've adapted the Americans with Disabilities Act in Peru, and they've written the regulations, and now they're in the process of implementing. And they're just, again, just sort of asking us questions and just seeing what kind of tools and resources they need to really be effective in implementing the law in Peru.
So, going back to that experience, can you talk a little bit about when you are exchanging ideas and having opportunities to engage with people from all over the world on this topic? What are the main lessons that you have been taking in relation to there are cultural factors behind the way how people operate and provide service for people with disabilities, but what are the things that somehow we all have in common, but somehow are still addressing, not seeing as much progress as we would like to see?
Right. Well, you know what? And you absolutely hit it on the head. I mean, you have to understand what's happening in the culture at the time, and some of the things that we've looked at is, what are the resources to set up a JAN-like entity? And this kind of goes back to the history of JAN, which in 1983, the President's Committee on the Employment of the Handicapped, so you can certainly see how times have changed in terms of language and attitudes that organization or that agency certainly has changed their name over the years. But there's a gentleman in particular who played a role, Jay Rockland from AT&T, and he was a major driver of the idea of the Job Accommodation Network. So at that time, we really saw some large companies come together like Sears, AT&T, 3M, and what they proposed to be JAN would be really peer-to-peer and employer-to-employer, and that once an employer provided an accommodation, then they can share it widely with other corporations. And what we quickly found is that that really didn't work. There was too much changeover, too much in positions in corporations. They really didn't have the time to share best practices. And what we've all learned over the years, which is really accommodations are one person at a time, because disability, impairment, chronic health conditions are so different. That oftentimes you can't just apply one accommodation across the board. Just because someone has low vision doesn't mean that it's the same piece of assistive technology is going to work with everybody who has low vision. So we found out very quickly that that model didn't work even in the US, and we realized that the time had come with the technology in place that we could build the database. We could receive those calls from corporations and then share the information broadly. So the international lesson here is that just very much like when I was in Colombia, it was the ITT companies, it was the communication companies that really was driving the process, because they understand the value of technology and what technology can do for people with disabilities. So, and then when I've seen, and I can just say that I've seen that broadly across the world, that communication companies are major drivers. Another lesson that we learned is that you really have to look at, again, going back to the culture of the country, what kind of resources are available, what kind of NGOs are functioning in the country? How are the universities functioning? So one of the things, for instance, and I'll go back to the Columbia example because I think that's a good one, is that we were coordinating with a relatively new rehabilitation program in Columbia. So without the infrastructure of having a profession of rehabilitation counselors, then it's very challenging sometimes for countries to really set up a JAN-like organization and service. One country, which will go unnamed, what they decided to do is that they would hire people off of the street and they would just set up a call center because they basically interpreted our model as a call center. And that in its first year, it really wasn't successful at all. And then that program was, and that call center was discontinued because you really can't get just people off of the street to really understand the intricacies of various industries and various accommodations and assistive technology. And that's why, you know, in the introduction, when I spoke a bit about our consultants and their education, and I do that consciously because that's what's really important, is that you do understand, you do have people that understand rehabilitation as well as the workplace, the modern workplace and what that's like, and understand assistive technologies. And that's pretty specialized. That isn't just something that one can bring somebody off the street really to discuss intimately with someone who's having a productivity issue in the workplace, or a young person that wants to disclose and really wants to know what kind of accommodations are out there, or how to, you know, one of the things that we do with our individual customers, again, our young customers in transition, is we talk a lot about disclosure. You know, the Americans with Disabilities Act puts the responsibility of disclosure on the individual. So what does that look like? Who do I talk to if I want to disclose? Again, all of that is culturally specific. So you really have to dig into the law as well and how it's written and who has responsibility for what. Funding is another issue. Funding is both a barrier sometimes as well as really a way to provide accommodation. Some countries have a pool of money, like Australia. And they are willing to pay for those accommodations. Well, we know right away that oftentimes, even though our research that we conduct here at JAN, our JAN study that we call it, 59% of accommodations are provided at no cost whatsoever. We still find that there is a myth that accommodations are very expensive. And indeed, some assistive technologies, you know, do cost a bit of money. So that's a barrier, you know, in the U.S., not so much, but certainly in other countries that don't have the wealth of the U.S., that is a true barrier in terms of accommodating people with disabilities. So again, to your point, we absolutely have to look culturally. What are the resources available? What are the NGOs available to provide information? And is there already an infrastructure in place, or do we need to put that infrastructure in place? So, so those really are the questions and some of the answers when we're looking at providing technical assistance across the globe. Also, we're looking at the change within countries of economies. In the U.S., most of our consultations really have to do with information provision and, you know, sort of white collar positions and information management. So that's the thing where we're finding a lot of the jobs that you know 30 years, 40 years ago were in the U.S. The textile jobs have moved to Asia. So you really have to look at what kind of jobs too exist in various countries. So
yeah.
Did I answer your question then?
Yes, it did.
It's a great answer.
Yeah, and you were mentioning about this disclosure, something that we see we are, you know, in Europe, in the United States, we have workforces that are aging, you know.
Yes.
And we also know that a lot of people end up in a situation of a disability with age as well. How do you see, and how's the organizations dealing with the fact of creating an environment where they are able to facilitate disclosure for older employees without them being discriminated in the workplace. And at the same time, we end up in situations where organizations, they have to find ways to accommodate them, and they need to find ways that they are able to keep them at the same time, knowing that they provide value and knowledge for the organization.
Yeah, so I think that's really an excellent point, and something that we focus in a lot. I can just tell you that 83% of our consultations really are what we call stay at work or return to work. Most of the time, the people involved there, the employees involved there, really are aging workers with chronic health conditions, and that's what we really talk about a lot. Now, we look to Japan, who has seen this age wave happen a bit sooner, as well as Italy, and we look at some of the staged retirement that they're doing, the programs that they're doing, the more flexible work arrangements for older workers, and we're looking for examples, the best practices that we can replicate from those countries. But this is definitely an issue. I think, in the U.S., again, the U.S. specific environment, we're looking at full employment, 4.1% unemployment rate. I think we're finally seeing that employers overall are valuing older workers and understanding that they are a major investment for their country. They have they have considerable institutional knowledge, and that you should do everything that you can really to keep the older worker engaged with your company. And that may be something like, what we provide consultation on a lot these days is cancer, and people are surviving with technology and healthcare to be older and older, even having cancer. So we're looking at a lot more people returning to work with cancer after chemo. And what does that look like, and how do I continuously keep that person engaged in the workplace and bring them back to work, perhaps part-time in another position, until we can get them integrated back into their position. Because as we know, chemo radiation kind of ravages the body, creates some cognitive difficulties as well. But they can come back and in 3 months be at full production again in a position. And I think that we're all recognizing that it's important for many reasons. I mean, because we're all human, right? That's really important. But I think too that there's a strong business case as well, whether it be the employment issue or whether it be how easy it is to keep people engaged with technology these days. So aging employees, I think it's a global issue. And I think we're looking for best practices, really critical success factors across the globe to see what works and what doesn't work. And we're certainly embracing what we can in the U.S. and trying to create models as well here in the U.S. for that to work. A lot of big companies, if I looked at Manpower reports from 10 years ago, a global company providing temp workers, and really most companies, I think they said 80% of companies were not really prepared for succession and for this age wave. And we see that in particular, like utility companies, really, those are often tough jobs, and they did not prepare. And now their average worker is over 42 years old, leaning towards 50. Starting to manifest chronic health conditions, and what do? You really didn't prepare for this wave. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Antonio, because I think that is absolutely, you're right on, spot on. It's a major issue.
And one thing that we like about Ask Jan in the United States is that as they learn about all this, they do research studies, they do surveys, they have a lot of content that they freely share. And that's one thing that I'd like to dig into a little bit, Lou, because I do know this answer, but did someone hit you with a couple of questions? Is there a charge to the employers? Is there a charge to the individual? And then I was also, after you answer that, if maybe you could just talk about, and I know it's all confidential, so just an example of how an employer and an individual might come to Jan and work with Jan. So just digging a little bit into some examples of how you work with different clients.
Sure. All of our services are free. We're contract funded, again, through the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. So you needn't worry about that. In the same way as oftentimes what we will have is an organization, an NGO is having a conference and they want to replicate some of our materials and present them at the conference. And none of our materials copyrighted. Of course, we just ask that you give credit where credit is due if you're using our information. But we do find that oftentimes our presentations, our publications are replicated at conferences and used for other purposes and repurposed. And we're glad. That's get the word out, get as many people having this information as possible so we can move that needle of getting more people with disabilities hired. That's hired and also retained, and that's really what it's all about. That's what we're really all about. So let me just talk about some of our customers. So our major customer, the customer that we do the highest consultation with is really employers. Typically, while you would want an accommodation maybe question to come in from a subject matter expert, which is really one of these best practices now, a centralized integrated system for accommodation. Most companies, small, medium, middle market companies really do not have that kind of infrastructure in place. So oftentimes a supervisor is calling. They're unfamiliar with perhaps something, a very unique disability or chronic health condition that they've never heard of. Somebody's just disclosed. Oftentimes it's an aging worker. And that doesn't come in, and our law doesn't require it to come in as I am asking for an accommodation under the ADA, and I have this specific disability, and this is the accommodation I want. I mean, as we know, that's really not how it works, nor from our regulations, how it needs to work. So we really just have a customer, a supervisor has an employee that discloses, and let's use let's use another example beside cancer, multiple sclerosis. So what we've seen is that this employee has fallen a couple of times at work, been really unsteady in their gait and not really understanding what's going on. And so they're going through some testing, and all of a sudden they have this diagnosis of multiple sclerosis after multiple tests and going to multiple doctors. And so they find this out, they bring this information to the supervisor, and then the supervisor, certainly knows what multiple sclerosis is, but doesn't know really what kind of impact that will have in the workplace. And they don't know about accommodations either. So it's the supervisor that's coming to us asking us, well, I've just had this this employee, a longstanding valued employee who's asking for an accommodation. They report that they have multiple sclerosis. I really don't know what to do from there. So what we do is we coach that supervisor through. There's a series of questions that they could use to triage and find out as much information as they can from that person and to understand really where that what stage the multiple sclerosis is in, what really the doctor is saying, what kind of limitations, what kind of progress, what kind of treatment. So, another example is the youth that I mentioned earlier about transitioning into the workplace. And they too will call, and they'll just say, hey, I'm looking for a job. I really want to know, I need to disclose my disability because it's apparent. How do I really do that in a way that I'm empowered and I can really express, the strength that I have, the confidence, the resilience that I have to pursue this job and do it effectively.
So,
go ahead, Antonio.
Today we see so many changes, especially in technology, and we see new products that can help people with disabilities. Sometimes they are not designed for them, but they end up being able to be used, and they end up helping them in a very interesting way. So how do you what type of technologies have you seen over the past year, let's say, that not to go further, that you can see that they are interesting, and you can see that you can bring them to your work, and that can help to accommodate people with disabilities?
Well, let me preface it by most of the assistive technology information, technical assistance is provided by our sensory team. So by no means will I consider myself a assistive technology specialist. Okay, so let me preface it with that. But I really think that there are some really interesting technologies that I've seen, whether I go to the Assistive Technology Industry Association or to the CSUN conference. We're seeing technologies, for instance, for someone who is blind, that there are attachments to, either a headband or glasses if somebody has low vision, that people in a call center can see the information that that person is not able to see, but yet then able to interpret what's going on and read information for them, whether it be signs, and we're talking navigation, or whether it be in an office place, reading a document for them in real time, so that they are in many ways have the abilities that a sighted person would have in accessing that information. So I think developments like that are very exciting. Video phones for people who have hearing conditions or who are deaf. Relay services, I think, in the US that this technology has gotten so good. And we're also seeing that, technologies that are for meetings like Zoom and a number of other providers of webcasting technologies who have really come on board and really understanding accessibility and provide real-time pods for sign language, for instance, whenever you're trying to convey information at training. And we know there's a shortage of interpreters, and we know that interpreting is pretty expensive. So these are just wonderful ways the technology really produces results for us. And just in technology too, that's assistive technology. But if we have a minute, I just want to talk about enabling technologies too. And I talk about those a lot because we really, when we look at the workplace, we really have to understand that universal accessibility of technology products is extremely important to all of us. And we need to make sure that our applicant tracking systems are accessible, our human resource systems are accessible, and that we have these enabling technologies at work that are not assistive technology, but they enable people to do their jobs with various disabilities. And the business case there, if we need a business case, the business case there is that really businesses have to understand that if you have, for instance, a certified technologist that knows accessibility, say they've been certified by the International Accessibility Association of Professionals, IAAP, then if we have somebody embedded, then all products and services, we're going to ensure that they're accessible. If we have an organization who's has enabling technologies where everything is accessible, you get the best talent, and then you don't really have to go through the interactive process and spend the time creating all of these various one-on-one accommodations for people. You will always have those. I'm not going to say that you don't. That's not really the promise of the future because chronic health conditions and impairments and disabilities so unique. But if you create things universally accessible, you're going to certainly minimize the amount on one-on-one accommodations that you're creating. So with assistive technologies is really important. That's really important. The interoperability of those assistive technologies with new products and services, that's really important. But I think also there needs to be a focus on enabling technologies. And we really need to look at all the current, companies really need to do an audit of all of their technology that they use and ensure that it isn't. And if not, push back against vendors that are creating these technologies and writing into your contracts that they have to be accessible. They have to meet the international WCAG codes. They have to meet Section 508. I think this is just a requirement going into the future that, that really things have to be accessible to everyone. That's just the rule, not the exception.
Well said, well said. Well, thank you so much for joining today. Let's make sure that we thank Barclays for supporting AXSchat. They allow us to continue these powerful conversations. Thank you for the leadership, Lou, you are showing us throughout the United States, and the work that's being done at Jan, and also the work that the work is being funded by our Department of Labor. I'm really proud of our Department of Labor, ODEP, for funding this really, really important work. Before we leave though, Lou, how can people find out? How can they get to Job Accommodation Network? What's the website? I know you're on all the social media, so
Yeah.
let's just give a little plug.
Right. So sure. So you can go to AskJan.org for our comprehensive services online. Our toolkit resides there. Our accommodation toolkit resides there, as well as our searchable online accommodation resource, two major tools that we find people frequenting often. You can call us at 800-526-7234. If you're an employer, you can just hit 3 in our phone tree. You go to a program assistant who asks you what kind of disability, chronic health condition, or impairment you're dealing with, and then they'll route you to the appropriate person. You can Janet Jan is our Twitter. We are on Twitter, as Deborah said. We also have a Facebook page that one could go to as well. And you could, if you're looking for a training, you can contact Ann and myself again at the 800 number, and we will certainly support you and get as much information out as we can to, again, move that needle of people with disabilities. So there's a number of ways to contact us. You'll also find an online chat. Particularly for human resource professionals, you can go to AskJan.org. Right-hand side box of all the contact information and how to contact Jan. There you will see live help. You hit that live help, you get a chat instantly, goes through the same process, program assistant routed to a consultant. And the beauty there is that you can, at the very end of that consultation, it asks if you want a copy of that consultation. So it's great to have that to put in your case management tool. Human resource people really love that feature, the chat feature. So that's many of the ways that you can contact us and use us.
Well, we sure do appreciate you. We really
Thanks.
do. We appreciate the work you're doing. This is all about the future of work too. So as Antonio mentioned, you know, technology is changing, and corporations are definitely they're looking to employ and retain people with disabilities. And I think Job Accommodation Network has been a big part of some of the successes we've experienced in the United States and around the world. So Lou, thank you. Once again, thanks to Barclays, thanks to Neil and Antonio, and we will talk to everyone on Tuesday.
Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, Deb. Pretty appreciate the